All right, so today we're diving into the luxury condo market in Bangkok.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, you send over this article,
Mm-hmm.
and it just seems like there's a lot to unpack here, so I figured let's just go for it.
Yeah, definitely.
Our mission today is to look at what's happening there right now,
Mm-hmm.
really get into the dynamics,
Yeah.
understand what's driving this market, and then figure out, what it means for our listeners,
Right.
whether they're just kind of interested in what's happening globally
Yeah.
with real estate, or maybe they're thinking about making a move.
Sure.
So this deep dive is based on a recent blog post
Yeah.
that gives us a snapshot of the Bangkok luxury condo market.
That's right. And I think what's interesting is that people may immediately picture, a booming luxury market when they think of Bangkok, but the reality is
Yeah,
a little bit more nuanced
for sure.
with some surprising pockets of strength.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. The article that you shared highlights some real price pressure on luxury condos in Bangkok.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, it seems like the core reason is really just a surplus of unsold inventory.
Okay.
So you've got a situation where there's just a lot of condos out there that haven't found buyers yet.
So how much are we talking about here?
The article throws out some pretty big numbers.
Okay.
They mention that last year, a massive 178.4 billion baht
Wow.
of new condos were completed in Greater Bangkok.
Billion.
Billion with a B.
Wow.
And they're projecting another 140.6 billion baht this year.
Goodness gracious.
So you can imagine that a significant portion of that is still sitting there unsold.
Yeah, that's a lot of condos.
It is.
Okay, so it's not just about the volume of condos available, right?
Mhm.
Because, sometimes even if a buyer and a seller kind of agree on a deal,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't necessarily go through.
That's true. And the article mentions that stricter mortgage lending rules are having an impact. So even if a buyer puts in an offer,
Yeah,
if they can't actually get the financing,
right.
the sale falls through.
Yeah.
So that also adds to the pool of available properties.
So for our listeners out there, this shows how things like economic shifts
Yeah,
and regulations
absolutely.
can have a huge effect on the market,
For sure.
creating some challenges, but also some maybe interesting opportunities,
Right.
depending on where you stand.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's dig into those economic factors a little bit.
Oh, what?
We're talking interest rates,
Mm-hmm.
government policies.
Yeah.
How are those influencing buyer behavior?
So higher interest rates obviously make borrowing more expensive.
Yeah.
And that can definitely cool down buyer enthusiasm
Right.
and also reduce their ability to purchase in the first place.
Makes sense.
And the article also mentions that there is an anticipated decrease in new project launches,
Okay.
which makes sense because if you've already got a lot of unsold inventory.
Yeah, why build more? And then if you've got lower buyer demand anyway,
Right.
why would you launch a new project?
It wouldn't really make sense, would it?
No.
But there is one thing that I found really interesting.
What's that?
The article talks about a 7.1% increase in expats living in Bangkok
Okay.
in 2024.
Wow, that's a big jump.
It is.
Where are all these expats coming from?
Well, the article says that the biggest group is from China
Okay.
at 28%.
All right.
And then the Philippines is next at 25%.
Got it.
And then Japan is at 14%.
Okay, and so how does that influx of expats affect the market?
Well, think about it.
Mm-hmm.
All those people need a place to live.
Yeah, that's true.
So it can give a boost to the rental market.
Right.
And then, if there's increased rental demand in good areas,
Yeah.
then that can make owning a condo in those locations more attractive to investors.
That's a good point. Something to keep in mind. If you're thinking about investing in property in Bangkok.
Right.
Okay, so we've got a picture of a lot of condos on the market.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some economic factors
Yeah.
that are making people a little more cautious.
Right.
So let's talk about the basic equation of supply and demand,
Okay.
because the article uses a pretty good analogy to explain this.
It does. It says to imagine that you've got a certain number of luxury condos for sale.
Okay.
That's your supply.
Supply.
And then you've got a certain number of people looking to buy those condos.
Okay.
That's your demand.
Got it.
So if you've got way more supply than demand,
Mhm.
like it seems to be the case in Bangkok right now,
Yeah.
you're going to see downward pressure on prices.
Right.
But the article makes a really important point.
Okay. What's that?
It's not just about the raw numbers.
Explain that.
So the where
Yeah.
and the what really matter.
When you say the where, you mean location.
Exactly. Location is key.
Okay.
So a condo with amazing river views
Mm-hmm.
in a prime central district
Yeah.
is going to hold its value much better
Right.
than something comparable in a less desirable area. And the type of condo also matters.
Right. You wouldn't expect a tiny studio apartment to be priced the same as a huge penthouse.
Exactly. A smaller city center apartment
Yeah.
is going to attract a different buyer than, say, a sprawling penthouse
Right.
with all the bells and whistles.
Sure, with like 4 bedrooms.
Yeah, multiple bedrooms.
A private gym.
Exactly.
You know, all that stuff.
So while the overall statistics can give you a broad picture, you have to really understand the specifics of what's available and what people want.
Right, the little details.
Exactly.
Okay, so within all of this, the article points out that the very top tier, the super luxury segment, seems to be doing pretty well.
It really is, and it's interesting because you've got this kind of overall market pressure.
Yeah.
But then you've got this super luxury segment, especially branded residences, that seem to be weathering the storm quite well.
So what's the story there?
Well, I think branded residences offer something really unique. They're luxury condos, but they're affiliated with these well-known hotel brands or lifestyle brands. And I think for a certain type of buyer, that's a really compelling proposition.
So it's not just about the name.
Right. It's not just about the prestige.
Right.
There are actually some really specific reasons why people are attracted to these properties.
Like what?
Well, think about the service standards.
Okay.
You know, you're getting the same level of service that you would expect from a 5-star hotel.
You've got like concierge services and housekeeping and stuff like that.
Exactly. And then there's also the potential for rental income.
Oh, right, because the hotel can manage it for you.
Yeah, they often have these hotel managed programs.
Got it.
Which can be a big draw for investors.
Sure, especially if you're not planning to live there full time.
Right.
So even though there's some downward pressure on the average luxury condo price, these super exclusive properties are still commanding top dollar.
They are, and the article gives some examples.
Okay, what are we talking about price-wise?
So super prime properties can go for $400,000 to $500,000 baht per square meter.
Wow, those are some serious numbers.
It is a lot of money.
Okay, so there's this huge amount of unsold inventory.
Yeah.
And developers are really feeling the pressure.
Definitely.
And the article mentions that they're carrying a lot of debt.
They are.
How much are we talking?
The article says that at least 24 listed developers have significant unsold condo inventory.
Yeah.
And their combined long-term debt is over 156 billion baht.
Billion with a B.
That's right.
That is a lot of debt.
It is a huge amount of money.
And it's due within the next year.
Yeah, it's coming due soon.
So what are they doing about it?
Well, they're trying different things.
Like what?
Offering discounts, promotional packages.
Yeah, got to entice the buyers.
Exactly.
Anything else?
Some developers are shifting away from high-rise condo projects and moving towards low-rise housing developments.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe they're seeing a stronger demand there.
Makes sense.
And get this, some developers are even looking outside of Bangkok.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the article specifically mentions Phuket.
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 Oh, Phuket. Okay.
And you know, this is really interesting because the article we're looking at comes from Ocean Worldwide, which is a luxury real estate agency.
Okay.
That's been based in Phuket since 2004.
So they know what they're talking about.
Exactly.
Phuket, not Phuket.
Phuket.
Got it.
And their director, Sandra O'Neill, she's been helping families and property investors in that area for years.
Thousands of them, the article says.
Thousands, yeah. So they really know this market.
They're the experts.
And they focus specifically on luxury residential real estate in Phuket and Koh Samui.
So it's interesting that they're highlighting these developers moving to Phuket.
Right.
Because that seems to be where the demand is right now.
Yeah, especially from international buyers.
Okay, so let's talk about the buyers in Bangkok. Who are these people buying luxury condos?
Well, it's a pretty diverse group.
Okay.
You've got wealthy Thai nationals, you've got international investors, and then you've got expats.
Right.
A lot of high net worth individuals, executives.
Entrepreneurs.
People like that.
And we talked about the rising number of expats.
Yeah.
How is that changing things?
Well, you know, a lot of them are initially renting.
Right.
But if they decide to stay in Bangkok long term, they might end up buying property.
Sure, that makes sense.
And their preferences can influence what types of properties are popular.
And speaking of preferences, the article talks about how what buyers want is changing.
Right.
It's not just about how big the unit is anymore.
Exactly.
So what are people looking for?
Well, sustainability is a big one.
Okay.
People want eco-friendly features. They're also looking for wellness amenities.
Like gyms and spas and stuff?
Yeah. Things like gyms,
Okay.
green spaces, and then also smart home technology is becoming more and more important.
Sure. Makes
And
sense.
in general, people are looking for larger units
Interesting.
with flexible layouts.
I guess people are spending more time at home
Maybe.
than they used to.
Could be.
Because they want more space.
Right.
And they want to be able to configure that space
Yeah,
to
exactly.
meet their needs.
And overall, I think buyers are just becoming more discerning
Yeah.
and more value conscious.
So with potentially more expats in the city
Yeah.
and fewer new condos being built, what's happening in the rental market?
Oh, a long-term rental market is definitely growing
Okay.
because you've got fewer new condos coming onto the market.
Right.
And you've got this increase in the expat population.
Yeah.
So that's creating more demand for rentals.
Got it.
And then you've also got the tourism sector recovering in some areas, which is also contributing to rental demand.
Makes sense. So how do rental prices compare to purchase prices right now?
Well, it's tricky
Yeah.
because on the one hand, you've got these discounts and promotions on unsold condos, which might make buying more attractive.
Right.
But then on the other hand, some people might prefer the flexibility of renting.
Yeah, especially if they're not sure about their long-term plans.
Exactly.
So it really depends on your individual circumstances, your financial goals, and your risk tolerance.
Right.
Okay, let's look ahead.
Okay.
What's the forecast for the Bangkok luxury condo market in 2025?
Well, the article suggests that there might be some continued challenges.
Like what?
They're expecting an increase in unsold units, which could lead to further price drops.
Right.
And it seems like it's going to stay a buyer's market for a while.
Okay. And what about those stricter mortgage lending rules?
Yeah, those are probably going to stick around too.
So are there any bright spots?
Well, the continued growth of the expat population and a strong recovery in tourism.
Okay.
Those could be positive factors.
So more people renting could help to absorb some of that excess inventory.
Exactly.
Joe, what about the long-term outlook for the luxury segment?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag.
How so?
Some developers are moving away from large condo projects.
Yeah, we talked about that.
They're shifting towards low-rise housing or even looking at other regions like Phuket.
Phuket, right?
But the luxury and super luxury segments, especially those branded residences, they're actually showing some strength.
Interesting.
Sales for super prime and prime condos are still really good.
Oh, good.
Over 80%.
Wow.
So there's definitely still demand at the high end.
And the article also touches on how Bangkok compares to other global cities.
It does. It mentions Singapore and Hong Kong.
Okay.
And, luxury condos in Bangkok are often more affordable.
Even at the high end.
Yeah, even at the high end.
And it also mentions Phuket and Chiang Mai.
Right. So Phuket is obviously a big resort destination.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interest in beachfront properties there.
Makes sense.
And then Chiang Mai is more about lifestyle and nature.
Okay.
So buyers there are looking for properties with mountain views.
Interesting.
And both of those markets are seeing more and more international buyers.
So finally, let's go back to the developers.
Right.
What are the biggest challenges they're facing?
Well, they're under a lot of financial pressure.
Yeah, that debt is no joke.
156 billion baht.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
And then there's the issue of market saturation.
Right. There are just so many new condos out there that developers really need to find ways to stand out.
To differentiate themselves.
Exactly.
So that's why we're seeing this shift to other types of properties and to other locations.
Like Phuket.
Phuket.
It's a tough market.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Developers have to be really smart.
So to wrap this all up,
Okay.
we took a deep dive into the Bangkok luxury condo market.
We did.
Based on this great article that you sent over. And it seems like it's a pretty complex situation. There's definitely some price pressure right now.
Yeah.
Driven by this oversupply of condos. But that's creating some opportunities for buyers.
Right.
And then you've got this interesting dynamic with the super luxury segment.
Yeah.
And the growing rental market.
And then the developers are under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, they are.
They're having to adjust their strategies.
So all in all, it's a really fascinating picture.
It is.
Of what's happening in Bangkok.
And it makes you wonder what's happening in other markets around the world.
That's a great point.
Right.
Are there other cities where we're seeing similar trends?
For sure.
Something to think about.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
It's been great.
Likewise.
And we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.